Thanks, Al. Yeah, my name's Ethan Shavers. I've been with CEGIS coming up on 3 years, oh, no, just over 3 years at the holidays. I started with the group as a Mendenhall postdoc and then transitioned into a researcher and supervisor within the group. Really honored to be talking with this group. I've heard good things about these calls, and Al speaks highly of the type of discussion that happens here. So thank you for having me. And just to check, you can see my screen now, the PDF.
Yeah, looks good.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about work that we're doing within CEGIS. CEGIS is a research group inside of the National Geospatial Program, as Al mentioned. And our work is all on looking at advanced geospatial methods and their applications to cartography. And so I'm going to be talking about work related to future. The goal is looking at automated update and validation of the NHD, especially in light of the nice data sets that are being collected now, including LIDAR and IFSAR. My navigation sorted out here. First, to mention some of our collaborators. This is only some of them, certainly. We have a lot of people we're working with. Educational institutions, other people within the state and federal government, and actually internationally as well. But these are some of our primary collaborators, and some of these names will come up again throughout the presentation. To begin, we're looking at updating and validating NHD features, so surface water features. And using that, with that goal in mind, strategies that we're employing are remote sensing and modeling, using data that will potentially be available for the whole country in the near future, or the foreseeable future, I should say. And a common way to derive hydrographic features is flow accumulation modeling. It's a standard way to get flow networks, as I'm sure most people on this call are aware, but there are a lot of challenges related to that. So things like inaccuracy elevation models, roads can cause obstructions, and then the need for thresholds to determine density. And of course, these things need to be validated and edited manually. And so with that, I mentioned thresholding and inaccuracies in elevation modeling. These things, or elevation data, these things can especially have large effects on headwater features. So this is an example. When we talk about headwater features, this is the initiation of flow, so the very upstream extent of a network. First order, we also call them low order streams or first order streams. And as you can see in these pictures, this is from our study area in the Midwest in Missouri. These are mutable features. They change a lot. The location of that stream head can change a lot. A single large storm event could change this. And they're also very small features, so they can be hard to identify from remote sensing data. And so you take that and then you add in the difficulties that can be related to flow accumulation modeling. These are really the hardest places to model and to validate for hydrographic features. And this is a problem that others have recognized. So most of you are probably aware of these challenges. And so we have the challenge of modeling, validating these headwater features. Well, also we have the challenge that there are a lot of these. This is a graphic showing the ratio of 1 to 24K first order streams, percentage as length of total length. And what this shows is that at the 1 to 24 scale for the NHD, greater than 52%, or roughly 52%, greater than 50% are first order features. And it is understood that the NHD is underrepresented as far as headwater streams go. So there's a massive amount of features that are going to be very hard for us to model reliably, update and validate reliably. And that's where the most of our work is focused, is on identifying these headwater stream features. And on top of that, areas that offer extra challenges are low relief agricultural areas where surface flow is hard to model, and then also forested areas, especially with steep slopes. Some of the strategies I'm going to be talking about today, I mentioned I've only been with CEGIS for a few years, so all of this is ongoing research, relatively new research projects. So none of this is operational yet. We are tackling for things that we are getting good results for. We're moving forward and looking at how to expand those things and move them into an automated environment. So this is all still research in progress, just to get that out of the way. But for stream identification, some of the things I'll talk about are using cross sections, channel cross sections, and taking metrics from those. Some machine learning methods that we're looking at, and then also some stream characterization methods we're looking at to potentially add value, add extra attributes to the NHD, and be able to preserve those attributes at different scales. So cross sections is really a classic geomorphic analysis method. It's taking cross sections of stream channels and all sorts of geomorphic features, certainly, and also a data reduction method. We're looking at analyzing elevation data and other raster data sets, pixel data sets, reflectance data, satellite imagery at fine scales, 1 meter and sometimes sub-meter scales. And we're hoping to look at these for the whole country. So ways to reduce the load for the processing definitely are beneficial. And so there's dual benefits there. The strategy that we decided to go for here is to over-extract flow lines. We're looking for methods that don't require user input, automated, completely hands-off is the goal. So over-extract flow lines up to catchment boundaries, draw profiles across those flow lines, extracted from with DEM values, as you can see in this plot. So elevation values as we go across a cross section. And so this is a stream from one of our North Carolina study areas. And then we're looking at those both in raw form and trying different smoothing methods on these profiles. And then once we have those, we test different, have tested different statistics on these cross sections. So some of the things that we tested are looking at curvature, standard deviation of curvature, coefficient of variation, slope, max slope, mean slope, area under the curve, area of channels. We've tested a lot of different things here. And these are some of the things other people have looked at these things. Curvature is a common metrics that's used for stream channel delineation. So this isn't necessarily an original approach, although this is the first use of it in cross sections. And not the first use of curvature, but some of the first use of some of these other metrics, such as standard deviation of curvature, coefficient of variation. And so we here have a sample plot. I hope you can see my cursor. Elevation across a profile here. I'm going back between the terms profile and cross section. And this is an example of what the curvature signal would look like as you move along. So the curvature is calculated by looking at a point on that line and then the points around it and basically taking the radius there. And as the radius gets smaller of the curve in the line, the curvature increases. This is one of our test areas. In Panther Creek is the catchment, and that's just west of Des Moines. So very flat, not a lot of relief, and pretty much all agricultural. And these are some headwater streams, and we drew profiles across these and started looking at these different elevation metrics, elevation derived metrics. And the one that jumped out at us is standard deviation of curvature. So that is a single value you get for each cross section. So you calculate the standard deviation of all the curvature values as you move across that profile. So then you end up with a single value for each profile. So as you move down this stream, you would get a single standard deviation of curvature value for each of these profiles. And then you get to a point where that channel initiates, and what we see is a jump in mean and variance in standard deviation of curvature. And we saw this was a pretty stable signal in this area. You know, this is one of, as we mentioned, these low relief areas where drain tiles are ubiquitous, are very hard to model. And so it looked like a stable metric in this area. So we've been building on this. So we have a change point here where we go from a low mean and low variance standard deviation of curvature values to, and we get a jump. And so it just so happens change point detection is a old problem that people have been looking at for several different disciplines: seismology, electronics, acoustics, economics, anything where you have a signal processing. Change point detection is a really important tool, and there's different ways to do it. There's lots of different ways to do it, of course, because people have been looking at it for a long time. But and there can be different methods for variance and different others for change in mean, and some are able to detect both. And so we have some automated tools, some that are R packages and some Python packages that others have built. We've also done some of our own in Python. Well, let me see what I have next here. Yeah, so the top one, you know, we have this stream here. We have, you move across downstream, you get to a point, you get a change. This is cross-section count. And you could compare this to where you're moving along with signal, and then you get a jump in variance or a jump in mean. I'm going to jump to North Carolina now. Our early work was in Iowa, because that's, you know, that about as challenging as you can get for flow modeling. But then we were made aware and given access to a great set of field validated stream head points from North Carolina. The North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources provided this data. And so we've been looking at several catchments in this area, and these are field validated single visit, but using benthic species and geomorphic sign, you know, bed formation, bank formation, stream cutting, and identified as intermittent, perennial, or ephemeral. And mostly, but what we'll be looking at is intermittent stream heads. And so we have 4 study areas that we'll be talking about. One in this low relief tidewater region, the Sandy Creek study area. 2 in the Piedmont, which is intermediate between the mountains and that tidewater, and easier to model, just kind of, you know, gentler slopes. And then the mountainous Asheville area. This is the Rowan area. So within the Piedmont region, this is the catchment, and here are the existing NHD lines for that area in blue on the left, and then the field validated stream head points. And these, I'm pretty sure, these are intermittent. There may be 1 perennial, and then a few ephemeral stream head points here. And then, so as I mentioned, we start by generating flow accumulation lines. The 1,000 cell skeleton is the threshold we use. So 1,000 accumulation cells is where we initiate the flow lines, and that we found that reliably to take us out to the catchment boundaries pretty much, as you can see. And then we looked at, you know, what was the flow accumulation values for all the stream heads we had. And we found reliably, you know, if you have a flow accumulation of 450K as a starting point, all the stream heads will be above there. So basically moving down channel, starting from 1,000 where we initiate. Once you move down channel and you get to where 450,000 cells are contributing to that channel, we took from that point upstream and use that as a starting point for our change point detection, assuming that we would within that 1,000 to 450,000 range, we would see a stream head. So the change point detection results for this, this is a plot with all the, so we ended up doing 3-meter spacing with these cross sections, 40-meter wide, I believe, so very dense cross section, but this is high resolution QL1, a LiDAR derived elevation, so that 3-meter we can still see some variation as you move down the channel. And these are the standard deviation of curvature values. Here you can see the legend at the bottom. They increase as the colors get cooler, and how they align with channels in here. The change point methods, we had good results, but automating that and being able to automate the determination of which were the change points of value was very challenging. When we look at the plots of the, it'll find 2 or 3 change points within a channel, and we see that it's getting the stream head, but it's getting other things too. And then determining which one was the important change point, and we have not resolved that problem. Big issues were road intersections, so culverts, water bodies, and also there's a broad floodplain down the middle of this one. And anytime the channels got near there, we've got very significant change points. So there is work to be done yet on the change point detection here. But we did look at data distribution within channels, modeling from this Rowan area, and found a threshold SK standard deviation of curvature value that did a good job of pruning back. So if we've identified a certain density of cross sections with the standard deviation of curvature over this threshold value that's determined from the spread, so the range of the values instead of the number of the values like mean, that we were able to get very good results. And this you can see all channels or cross sections rather that were above the threshold, and then once they reach a certain density, we cut off everything upstream, and this is what the results look like, with stream heads imposed as circles here. And this is important that we're not using the number of cross sections, like taking averages or anything like that, because of density variations that we see. As you know, some regions have high density channels and others have low. So we want a threshold, a way to look at the data unique to an area without depending on a certain counts or a certain number of channels. And we've been able to test this because there's the density changes, the density of these catchments that we're looking at decreases as you move east. This is zooming in on some of the results from the other area. In the Asheville area, what we see, so the stream heads are identified, and these are extracted channels and dashed lines. And then the over extracted channels are hard to see, but they're in gray. You can see especially down here. And then small circles are the stream heads, the field validated stream heads. And so what we saw is that there were a lot of channels in the Asheville area that did not have identified stream heads. So these are ephemeral channels, likely they just weren't they weren't mapped in the data set. So these hurt our scores. Also, so this is the high relief, this is all forested, this catchment. And then we have the Sandy Creek area in the west and the coastal plain, as you can see, very flat. And there are a lot of drainage canals out there. And so we had issues here with these lines being mapped by our method, but not being identified in the streamhead data set. So you can see here is the streamhead here and here, but yet there are still channels going upstream. So yeah, some places our results look better, and some places they don't. Like in the Gaston area here, you can see on some channels We were able to get past these water bodies and really align well with the field validated data. And then some other areas we just we lost track of that signal. These are all channels, so these plots are kind of they can be hard to wrap your brain around. So this is the bottom one. We'll start here. These are the results for all the stream heads, and so field validated. These are the ones provided from the state agency in North Carolina compared to extracted. So extracted is the point found by the cross section tool. And so this is the distance between these 2 points, the distance between the field validated stream head and the extracted head are these white columns. And then the shaded columns are the extracted, so identified by our tool versus apparent, where we did heads up identification using elevation and optical data, just trying to do some other method of identifying the stream channels, or stream heads, rather. And so this is the difference between those points. We can see most of them fall within 50 meters to 100 meters of the either field validated or heads up identified stream heads, and there are certainly outliers as well. But generally good results. And we compared this to the Peltier method, which is probably the closest thing to an automated stream network extraction tool. It does require input threshold, so it uses a raster curvature thresholding and to determine where channels could be. And so you have to set a curvature threshold value. And we found that you definitely needed to do it amongst these study areas. But even using that, setting the optimal threshold, our results are very similar to as far as accuracy to the Peltier method. And that's documented in a manuscript that is available. The Sandy Creek had probably the worst results, and a lot of the outliers were here, and it was because of those. So a lot of over extraction is what this means. Our tool identified channels way upstream, so up to more than 400 meters upstream of where the mapped field stream heads were, and those were generally the canals. This is a paper that came out last year that documents all that work. Now I'm gonna talk about some very different work, and this is, I showed our collaborators. This has the group from a University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana has been integral in this work. Xiao Wen's lab there, and Larry Stanislawski, my collaborator. They've all been a big part of this work. Larry may be on the line, actually. So we're looking at using artificial neural networks to identify streams, to build hydrographic networks. So our approach, we need training data. How are we going to train data for, train these models for unique areas all across the country? So we thought, look at existing vector networks. So in this case, look at streams and NHD streams rather, and then do flow accumulation modeling on an area, and where those two networks match up, use those match lines as training data. I'll show some of that coming up. And also available road vectors from the national map as well, use those as inputs, and then potentially we can train using those vectors, identify intersections and breach roads where necessary to derive a good line set that could be used to validate NHD features. These are the study areas. We've gotten access to some really nice contractor-derived hydrography data for several areas. So these are the areas now, several areas in Alaska, and then North Carolina. We have our field validated streamhead data and then contractor data in Virginia. So these are the areas that we're looking at. Of course, our original study areas in Iowa. And how we go at this So, those of you familiar with artificial neural networks probably would have a lot of questions. I'm just going to kind of cover some of the basic tuning methods used here. There's a lot of, the artificial neural network, the algorithms, the essential model is something that's built by labs, generally often for image extract or image classification or feature extraction is usually what they're going after. Often identifying, cancer cells or things like that in CT images. And so we're using these. Mixing a drink there, it sounds like. Using these models and tuning them to try to extract hydrographic features and roads. So as I mentioned, extract dense elevation derived drainage lines. The tools that we are looking at, open source tools, all of them, GeoNet and TauDEM are the ones that we're testing most often. Match the derived lines with NHD flow lines, and use those matching lines to train the models, and then using existing road vectors as well. So this here is in that Panther Creek low relief area, agricultural area in Iowa. The image itself is the topographic position index. Green line is the catchment boundary, and these are the matched lines for this small segment here. Sampling strategy. So how do we train the model? We randomly select pixels from the three feature categories. So that's stream, road, and then non-stream, areas that are not stream or road. So randomly select pixels, build windows around these. Different window sizes have been tested. I think the models we're working with now, it's a 224 by 224 pixel window. And so we have those, build these windows around the pixels, and then do augmentation. So distorting, skewing the window, or rotating it randomly, mirroring it. And with that, we end up with hundreds and often thousands of training scenes. A bit about the software and hardware involved. Currently, we're testing two different types of artificial neural networks. Pretty standard 2D convolutional neural network where there's just convolution layers and pooling layers. And then also looking at the UNet, which is a newer model that people have probably heard of. It's being used in a lot of domains, and it has convolution layers, and then it has upsampling layers as well on the back end of it, and also some other modifications that I'll mention in a minute. Software, again, all open source tools, Python, TensorFlow, Keras, using Slurm, so all with the Linux environment. The hardware, this is the high performance computer that we have access to in CEGIS. Input for these neural networks. So the model itself takes in layers, and we are using up to 14 layers. And so these are all aligned raster, uniform raster grid, two-dimensional, essentially, raster grid layers. Some of the things that we're using are geomorphons, openness, positive and negative openness, so geomorphons, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, identifies pixels as belonging to one of 9 or 10 generally standard geomorphic features, shoulder, foot slope, hollow. Openness is the mean angle in nadir, and it can be above the horizon or below the horizon, so they call that positive or negative openness. As you've seen, topographic position index is something we use, which is the difference between a pixel and the elevation of the surrounding pixels, and we use different window sizes. Also, LiDAR point cloud derivatives. We use things like return intensity, return point density. We use certain elevation densities, so just looking at canopy points or just looking at ground points. Topographic wetness index, surface curvature. So these are all raster layers that essentially stack up and feed in. And then, that training data looks at each one of those raster layers aligned with that single training window. This is the F1 score is what we use to report our accuracy results. And so there's a lot of different ways to say, you could say, percent correctly identified pixels is a way that you could report the accuracy of a model. The challenge is that if you look at the percent of stream pixels in one of these scenes is very low. So there's way more non-stream, non-road pixels than there are of the other two categories. So you need a way to balance that, and that's the F1 score is something that's often used in these kind of pixel-wise classification tests. And so this is it's a function of precision and recall, as you can see here. And take note that recall, so that's a portion of reference features correctly labeled. I'm going to refer back to that. So the false negative, adding in that false negative can reduce, higher false negatives reduce recall. These are results, early results from some of our first tests. This is just a 2D CNN test in Panther Creek, so that's Iowa. Some of our best results for looking at testing, so not including training data. So you train on an area and you test on another area using different layer combinations. So here we can see using TPI and openness, we're able to get 62% F1 score. Looking at the roads, getting 70%. And I'll show you what 70% F1 looks like here in a bit. Here, right away. So here we have the reference data. So these are road features and heads-up identified stream channel features. So this is what our best guess at what is actually on the ground. And we don't use this to train. This is just what we use to score our results. And this is what the best solution for stream channels looks like for this area. So you can see these are pretty good. They look better than that 60% or that 60 F1 score would tell you, because there are a lot of falsely identified features out here, small features. A lot of those tend to be abandoned channels that may be something you would add into the NHD, but we have to depend on our metrics. So the F1 score counts those as wrong. But these are a lot of things we believe that can be resolved in post-processing. So these are encouraging results for roads and streams as well. Connection is something, so deriving connected networks is something that we deal with a lot here too. Jumping to the Covington Creek area in Northern Virginia, we have contractor elevation or hydrography data here. And so that's this on the left. And here are some test results. So this is using the UNet model now. And so this is no attention. As the attention network is adding in an attention layer in the upsampling side of the UNet. And it basically tells the model to focus on areas where there are positive features. It's an optimization function that's been added in, and we do seem to get better results using that often. So these are looking at, so we get F1 scores here, 67 and 74. You can see that precision is generally higher than a recall for these. So once you start adding in false negatives, so areas that are actually should be identified by the model but aren't as stream or road, it tends to bring down those scores. So here training on this 5 by 5 kilometer area, and then testing on the full watershed. And this is down here, training on the full watershed and testing on the full watershed. So a lot of different ways that we're looking at this. This is looking at the road networks for that same area. And we get F1 scores. So these are both looking at training and testing on the same area, but it gives an idea of the type of how well we can capture that road density and pattern. Again, these are our validation data set on the left, and then the derived features on the right. If we zoom in on that small area on the right, the red box, we see what these results look like here. We're looking at the TPI, so topographic position index with a 21 cell window. And what we see here is that we are identifying most of these features accurately with really good results. We found that we're getting water bodies pretty reliably. Some areas where we miss, here you can see this very faint pink line is a road segment. So this would lower our score, but if you look here, there may not actually be a road there. So this could be inaccuracies in the vector data sets. And then we look, and these fainter green lines, you can see best here, are the contractor flow lines. And if you look where that's running, very flat, probably a channel, and very shallow probably as well. So something that's hard for the model to see, but otherwise pretty good results. All right, I'm going to change gears again. Sticking with the attention or the artificial neural network, still looking at the UNet model, but we have recently, we're still having issues identifying culverts and road channel intersections, and it's really a hindrance to the other modeling that we're doing because, as many of you probably know, that the flow lines are really valuable for deriving these networks, and they're a big issue. Culverts are a big issue. And so we're looking at, can we just use these models to identify culverts? And this has been facilitated again by the good folks at North Carolina Department of Natural Environment and Natural Resources. They have provided us with a statewide culvert data set. So this is along state managed roads. So it's not all the culverts in the whole state. There's a lot of them on private land or some that might have been missed that aren't identified, but it's a really good place to start. So we've been going in here, and this is early work. We really just started tuning models about a month ago, and we're still cleaning up the data. We have to go in there and because the models are really only as good as your training data. So, and I'll show some examples of that. But this is two Huck 12s in this kind of central western North Carolina area, about 160 square kilometers that we've pulled out to start testing this. And this is an example of what we're seeing. The F1 scores we're getting so far, the best ones are in the 60s. Mostly they're in the 40s. The good ones are in the 40s and 50s. So we're not getting good F1 scores doing this yet. Part of that is we're still finding culverts that we hadn't identified. So this is an example where it was trained and tested on the same region. And so the training features are in blue, and you can see the training feature was predicted, but also it showed us an area we had missed one. So this lowers our F1 score. And also the other big challenge here, probably the biggest challenge for gauging the quality of our results, I think, are the the very non-standard shapes. There's no normal culvert shape or culvert geomorphology. I mean, there's general things, a higher elevation linear feature intersecting a lower elevation linear feature, but they can look very different, and those different elevation features can look different. So, identifying what is a culvert, how big is a culvert, what is the boundary of a culvert, that's something that's given us trouble as far as predicting or gauging our results. This is a screenshot I took today. So we have the two hucks, and we've split them up in north-south sections, into east-west sections, and looked at different arrangements using different. We'll train on the western half of each of them, test on the eastern half, train on the southern half. All the different arrangements just to test the different training and testing features. And that's important because most of the urban area is in the eastern half of the northern huck. So we want to see how, training or testing on that area affects the results. That's the most challenging area as far as culverts go, as you can imagine. Just because there's not always an elevation, an apparent elevation feature related to the presence of drainage in urban areas. But this is, this is the results for the eastern half of the northern huck, where the urban area, this is actually just north of the urban area. And so this was tested on or trained on the western half, tested on the eastern half, and you can see we're getting good results. Most of the culvert features were identified. Of course, we have over extracted. That's not an issue if you thought about how we would use these results. Ideally, we would run this model and then burn the elevation model down to a lowest vicinity point within the identified culvert region. So you can see these larger, more amorphous, blobby results being actually useful for burning, but they're not good for our scores. But then also, we see areas where, it just totally misses. It's hard to imagine how some of these other culverts could be identified, and then this one in the middle missed, but that's the way these things work. So there's a lot we don't understand still. We're still tuning what layers to add into this. We kind of just took that stream network UNet model and started feeding in culvert training data. So the culvert features themselves. So we're still working on tuning. Tune window size, input feature layers. There's a lot of things that we can do to hopefully improve and get some good scores. And we're also looking at different ways to gauge that. So things that we're looking at for model optimization, testing other deep learning models. So we're going to be running these tests using the 2D CNN, which we've seen we can get good results with when we ran it on flow line or on streams and roads. The UNet is certainly faster, but with the computing power available to the USGS, we're not so worried about speed right now. We just want to see what gives the best results. So testing other deep learning models, testing different feature shapes for the training data. So you can see using different window sizes, using polygons, or different things we're trying, as I mentioned, adding in layers, testing the effectiveness of pulling out individual layers and how that affects the scores or the results. Adding in water bodies. Dams are kind of a middle ground. They're not exactly a culvert. It's not the intersection of a road or a linear feature like a road, the way we would normally expect to see a culvert in the landscape. But there's other aspects of them that are very similar to culverts. So we're looking at, adding in dams or not using them, and how water bodies affect the results here. And then also the effects of the input data spatial resolution. Right now, we're working at 1 meter. Okay, now I'm really going to change gears and don't have a ton of time, so I'm probably going to move quickly through this, which is going to be a challenge because this is a very different concept. But so sinuosity, Everybody's familiar with sinuosity and meandering streams. It's a standard feature of a stream. It's a single metric. It's an attribute of all streams, but it's also an indicator of the environment and the landscape. Sinuosity is a function of geomorphology, land surface type, sediment, supply, surrounding sediment types, uplift, tectonic setting. All of these things can impact sinuosity or meandering of the streams. So it seems like an important attribute of a channel for analysis, for change detection, and it's something that we would like to be able to preserve in multi-scale representation. So we're looking at ways to identify the sinuosity or the bend geometry of features. Classically, sinuosity, if you look up the definition of sinuosity in the glossary of geology, for instance, it's total feature length over straight line distance. And these are hypothetical streams that would have the same sinuosity. It tells you nothing about the actual geometry. It's only the ratio of end-to-end length over total feature length. So in reality, the sinuosity, as it's classically understood or usually understood, tells you very little about stream geometry. And so we are looking at some ways to get more detail, to describe better as stream feature or line feature in general geometry. Another metric that people use to look at line geometry is fractal linearity, fractal dimension. So this is the Richardson plot. The reference article is at the bottom here, but this is the line length, or so the line length as measured by certain step sizes. So you can see this L for this one would be the length as you measured across these steps, and this would be your step size on the x-axis and that line. And so total length would be at the beginning here, because you would assume a very small step size. So as those step sizes get bigger, or your ruler gets longer, your feature length decreases as you begin to cut off bends. And so this is that Richardson plot originally used to look at the borders of continents. And so the slope of the Richardson plot is equal to 1 minus the fractal dimension, or fractal dimension is equal to 1 minus the slope. And so that's the relation between fractal dimension and the Richardson plot. But it gives you one value for that feature. And so what we're looking at is to using the scale specific slope. So look at the slope as you move across the feature. And what we're calling that is S3, is the scale specific sinuosity. Yes, that would be hard to say 5 times fast. And so this is a plot. You have the Richardson plot and then the S3 plot of that feature here. And you can see how that slope changes as you move along that. And if we take that, interpolate that, you can start to see that you can identify feature lengths that contribute to the total fractal dimension of that feature. So I'm going to skip ahead to try to leave a little bit for questions. Does that sound okay, Al? Or do you guys go over sometimes? How should I play?
We can go over. We are recording this, so if people miss the last few minutes, they could catch up. So yeah, if you want to try to cover a little bit more, you could.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So as an example, we can look at a few features here. These are large streams from different ecoregions from across the country, and you can see how those S3 plots vary as the geometry, the bend geometry gets larger. So down here, we're looking at 10,000 meters here. So 10 kilometers. We're really getting into big region scale bends and features. These are some examples as you move across these features here. You can see where the plot is skewed to the left. We have these larger features or smaller features, smaller geometries. And as that peak moves to the right, we can see the geometry of the features gets larger. And so we've done some tests on this using a bunch of different simulated features with different bend types. And what we see is that the peak S3 value that we get, the peak, that peak location corresponds with the length from peak to trough of bend geometry. So that's what we're actually identifying in this S3 plot, is where that peak to trough distance is dominant. What lengths of peak to trough curves are we seeing in these features? And maybe I'll leave it here. So this, you can see how this could potentially be used. Look at how that S3. So what we have is a single vector data, vector, that line of S3 values that can describe the geometry, a variable geometry, the different type of bend radii or meander sizes that contribute to the total sinuosity. And you could look at how that changes as you move along a feature, and it could also be used potentially for change detection for a full feature. So I will stop there and leave some time for some questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ethan, and lots of interesting stuff. If folks have questions, you can either type those into the chat, or you can try just unmute yourself in the participants panel. Unmute your microphone and speak up here. We do have a lot of people on, so it might be better to just use chat. Still have 170 people on. Anybody have questions? I know Ethan covered a lot of ground. There were some chats about databases of culverts, which yes, that's there are some state DOTs that have them, and I remember Arkansas has a state database of culverts that they've actually indexed to NHD. So if you're interested in that, I could connect you with someone there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, Ethan, do you have a web page or anything? And one of the questions was, where to learn more.
Oh yeah. So I mentioned that the cross section paper. I should have mentioned that there are some conference papers and a journal article in the works for the artificial neural network models we're working on, and then these are some journal papers or conference papers that we have. We're working on a manuscript for a journal for the sinuosity work. And there is also a CEGIS website, so you can get links to data or links to projects and contact information there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we can maybe post that in the chat.
Yeah. If you could put that link in the chat,
Sure.
That'd be good. I did see a question about distributary networks. Have you done anything looking at any of that?
I'm not sure what that's referring to.
So sort of like a delta situation, where you have, instead of a bunch of confluences, but you actually have.
Right, of course, like braided streams maybe, or just not a single channel. Is that what you mean? Or is that? So
Yeah.
Right. So we're working, some of the places we're working are up in the Kobuk region, so northwest Alaska, and that's definitely something we see up there, and we're getting good results up there, probably better than some of the other areas, and there's less roads there. That's one thing, and it's mostly open, bare ground, not a lot of vegetation. But yeah, the model is able to identify those regions as well. And that the Alaska work is what we're writing up. So hopefully there will be a journal article on that soon.
Yeah. So there's one question about the ties if there are ties to this back to the generalization work that Larry had worked on quite a bit?
Yeah, certainly. So the S3 definitely has direct implications for that, because we want to find the best way to preserve meander geometry as we change scales. Um, so as we start to generalize features, how do we preserve that uh, that that valuable geomorphic characteristic that's represented in the meander geometry? So do we do that by attaching an S3 metric to that feature? Do we use it to evaluate how to actually how to affect the representation of that feature? That's definitely an issue. Generalization, there's also been some work uh, looking at using artificial neural networks for generalization. That's something that we haven't tried yet, but it's something we've seen out there, and it's probably moving in that direction.
Okay. Another question. What do you think about the potential to use these models in the built environment? So where you have a lot of, urbanization or that
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah, of course, that's a challenge. A big part of what we're doing is trying to get good flow lines and then use those to build networks supported by the artificial neural network results. So there's not a lot of application in the built environment if we talk about dense urban environments, but we are looking at that and seeing the effects in this culvert work. That's, I think, that's about as dense as we get. We make a lot of assumptions about having pretty decent flow networks for urban areas, like we know where the streams are in cities and things, so we tend to make those assumptions. And also they take up a lot less area across the country. um, so when you're talking about dense environments, we are not looking at those now, but down the line, something that we see as an absolute necessity is integrating uh, urban runoff and urban sewer systems into the NHD. So it's something we're thinking about.
Right. Yeah. We've done a bit of experimenting and with that. I think in this call series, we've had a couple of presentations about that in the last year or two. The Washington D.C. area, for
Mm-hmm.
one. Um, let's see. Another question about scales of TPI and shape for the window. I'm not quite sure what the. Do you
So
understand that question?
yeah, so scale of TPI. So TPI is actually a layer that we find to be very valuable for this, and other people have used it as well for thresholding where channels could be. So TPI is topographic position index, and it is the difference between a pixel's elevation value and the mean of the surrounding elevation values within a window. And so the scale is the size of that window. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I showed some where there was like a 9-cell window or a 20-cell window. And we use actually a couple of different, there's one of the models in Alaska where we're using a couple of different TPI scales. Um, and it seems that it's 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 most appropriate I mean, it's controlled by the size of the feature you're looking for. So we're looking for smaller features, looking for channels, so variation in the elevation as you go across the channel, or a bank, a single bank. So on the scale of meters, several meters to tens of meters is the scale that we're looking at, especially in Alaska where we have 5-meter elevation. We're getting up. We'll start to look at 20 cell windows up there.
Okay, there was one question about the tie-in of this to the EDH pilot work in Alaska and in Texas. So yeah,
Yeah,
you
certainly. That's what we see. That's great data for us to test these models. And so we've been looking at using that EDH data as training data in one area and then testing on other areas. And you know, it's invaluable really, because there's just having a good bearing on what the flow networks look like in, you know, north central Alaska. That's about as good as we can get. So that's really helpful for testing these models. And yeah, we're looking forward to getting our hands on the data for Texas as well.
Yeah, I probably should explain the acronyms. It's kind of a new acronym that we're using. EDH stands for Elevation Derived Hydro, and that's the basic concept of, you know, deriving our hydro layer, our hydro features from high resolution elevation data like LiDAR or IFSAR. I think, you know, we've gone over 5 minutes, but I think it's been really valuable. I think we're probably, we can probably call it good for today. Really appreciate, Ethan, your presentation. Lots and lots of good stuff in here. And really good questions from the audience as well. So thank you again, Ethan, and thanks everybody for attending.